Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here, and today's video is a little bit different than many of the other videos I put together. I thought it would be fun to go through and to show you the breakout of cards within my collection. I did this back in June of 2023, but I thought it would be good to revisit it again, and instead of just looking at the current breakdown, I want to compare it to where my collection was in April of 2021 until April of 2025. And I thought it would be fun to do that. I've been spending a lot of time recently curating my collection and taking an inventory, going through each of the boxes of cards that I have and matching them up with my entries in VCP. I've also been adding the certification numbers for each of my cards for insurance purposes, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've also realized that there are some cards that I didn't have recorded in VCP, so it's allowed me to take an accurate inventory of my collection, which for me as a collector, that's important. I don't collect primarily for monetary reasons, but it's important to me to have an idea of all the cards within my collection, an estimated value, and just to see an overall breakdown to see if my collection really is reflective of my interests within the hobby and in sports in general. So as you can see here on slide 1, it shows a number of graded cards in my collection. In April of 2021, I had 2,344 graded cards, and as of this month, I have 2,737. Now the percent of PSA graded cards back in April 2021 was 98%, SGC was 1%, and Beckett was 0%. Now it's 95% PSA, 4% SGC, and 1% Beckett. So as you can see, I've been moving a little bit more towards SGC and Beckett, but I still collect predominantly PSA, and that's not going to change. It really doesn't have anything much to do with me preferring PSA much more over the other two. While I do like PSA more, they're just more readily available than SGC and Beckett cards. But when I see SGC and Beckett cards I like, I have no problem adding them to my collection, as they're often a better value than PSA cards are for the issues that I collect anyway. Now if we look at a breakout by the 3 sports that I collect, my baseball graded cards in April of 2021 was at 1,123, which was 48% of my collection. In April of 2025, it's 1,250, but it's dropped down to 46% of my collection. Football has risen quite a bit, from 852 to 1,067. And the percentage has gone up from 36% of my collection to 39% of my collection. And for hockey, this one surprised me a little bit because I've been adding a lot of hockey cards, but it's really more so recently than over the past few years. So I expect this number to increase, but it was at 369 in April of 2021 and was 16% of my collection. Now as of this month, it's 420 and 15% of my collection. So overall, my breakout of cards is pretty well spread out. I have a good diversity here with the 46% baseball, 39% football, and 15% hockey. I do expect baseball to continue to drop some and football and hockey to go up a bit. I expect football to get into the lower 40s at some point, and hockey to maybe get around to the 18 or 19% range, but that's going to be over the course of several years, because you can see that I have quite a few graded cards, so it would take quite a large addition to my football and hockey to drive that number a lot. But I do like the diversity because I am as big a football fan as I am a baseball fan, and I like hockey cards, but there's just not as many hockey vintage cards out there as there are football and baseball, so that number is never going to go anywhere near where my football and baseball collection is. Here's a breakout of my collection by the decades. And as you can see here, for 1949 and earlier, I was at 18 cards in April of 2021. In 2025, I'm at 35 cards, so I pretty much doubled it, but I'm still at 1% of my collection. I expect this number to grow over time though. The 1950s, I'm at 354 in April of 2021, which was 15% of my collection. Now I'm at 460, which is 17% of my collection. For the 1960s, I was at 587, or 25% of my collection. Now I'm at 703, which is 26% of my collection. For the 1970s, I was at 736, or 31% back in April of 2021. Now I'm at 836, but still holding at 31%. And for the 1980s, in April 2021, I was at 646, or 28% of my collection. Now I'm at 698, and at 26% of my collection. There's been a slight drop in the 1980s, and you can see an uptick in the 50s and 60s, which that's a trend that's going to continue to hold because I do primarily focus, especially in hockey and football, into the 50s and the 60s. And then for baseball, more in the 40s, 30s, and then also some of the early 50s right now is where I'm tending to spend a little bit of my money into baseball. So I expect that trend to continue in that direction. Of course, I'll still add some 70s and 80s cards as well, but those are the primary areas of focus, and it's really reflective in the numbers as you can see here over the 4-year span. Here's the breakdown by grade. So you can see here, April 2021, I had 14 grade 10 cards. Now I have 13, so I sold one during that period. Grade 9, I had 368, which was 16% of my collection. Now I'm at 381, which is 14% of my collection. Grades 8 and 8.5, I was at 619, which was 26% of my collection back in April 2021. Now I'm at 704, which is still 26% of my collection. Grade 7 and 7.5, I was at 495, 21% of my collection. Now I'm at 584, which is still 21% of my collection. For grade 6 and 6.5, I was at 617, which was 26% of my collection. Now I'm at 742, which is 27% of my collection. Grades 5 and 5.5, I was at 226, which was 10% of my collection. Now I'm at 294, which is 11% of my collection. Grades 4 and 4.5, I was at 5, which was 0% of my collection. Now I'm at 18, which is about 1% of my collection. And I have one grade 3 card, which I didn't show it on the chart as being reflected, but I do have one grade 3 card in my collection, which is my 1948 leaf card of Doak Walker. But the rest of my collection is predominantly grade 4 through Gem Mint 10. So I expect that trend to hold with me increasing the number of grade 5 and 6 cards, because that's really an area that I like to buy most of my 50s cards in and into the early 60s. And then the grade 8s are probably going to continue to trend as well, because a lot of my 70s football is in that grade. So I could see a slight uptick in that as well, because I have been focusing some on 70s and 80s football as of late. But overall, I don't expect any drastic changes within my grade breakout. Here's a breakdown of my baseball collection. For 1949 and earlier, in April of 2021, I was at 18 cards, which was 2% of my baseball collection. Now I'm at 29, still holding at 2%. In the 1950s, I was at 151, which was 13% of my baseball collection. Now I'm at 187, which is 15%. 1960s, I was at 230 back in April 2021, which was 27% of my collection. Now I'm at 282, which has gone up to 28%. For the 1970s, I was at 307, which was 27% of my collection. Now I'm at 328, and it's dropped down to 26% of my baseball collection. For the 1980s, I was at 341 back in April 2021, which was 30% of my baseball collection. Now I'm at 360 and dropped down to 29%. In the 1990s, I haven't put this on all the charts, but I do have 2 cards from the 1990s now. Back in April 2021, I had 1 in my collection. And that's not going to increase. I don't really collect cards after 1989. I do have some sets in that, but I'm looking to move those, to be honest with you, and just really focus on my 30s to 80s graded card collection. That's my primary interest. So those couple 90s cards are going to stay. They have special meaning to me, but beyond that, other than maybe a few here and there I may add, you never know, things can change, but I'm predominantly a 30s to 80s collector, and that's reflected in these numbers. Here's my breakdown of football cards within my collection. So back in April 2021, I didn't have any football cards from 1949 and earlier. Now I have 6, which is 1% of my collection. For the 50s, I was at 187, showing at 22% of my collection. Now I'm at 243, and it's gone up to 23% of my collection. For the 60s, I was at 230, 27% of my collection back in April 2021. Now I'm at 282, and it's gone up to 28% of my collection. For the 70s, I was at 236, showing at 28% of my collection back in April 2021. Now I'm at 308, and it's gone up to 29% of my collection. For the 80s, I was at 197, or 23% of my collection. Now I'm at 226, but the percentage has gone down to 21%. I have 2 cards in football from the 90s and later, and that was the case back in 2021 and is still the case in 2025. So you can see for football that the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s has been a big focus. There's been an increase in all of those areas, and I had a decrease in the 80s. I still collect the 80s football cards, but mostly early 80s is my focus, predominantly 1981, because that's the set that has a lot of meaning to me. So I've been adding some cards from that set. And I do love collecting 70s football, so I see that trend continuing as well. But I'm also getting into the 40s football and the Leaf and Bowman issues, as well as I'm still adding 50s Bowman cards to my collection. So that's not going to change. I can see that trend to continue going forward. Now here's the breakdown of hockey within my collection. For 1950s, back in April 2021, I had 16 hockey cards from that decade, which was 4%. Now I'm at 31, which is 7%. For the 60s, I was at 52, which was 14%. Now I'm at 77, and it's jumped up to 18% of my collection. And you're going to see the decline in the 70s and 80s as a portion of my collection. I was at 192 back in April 2021, which was 52% of my collection. Now I'm at 200, but it's dropped down to 48%. And for the 1980s, I was at 108, which was 29% of my collection. Now I'm at 112, and it's also dropped from 29 to 27%, which makes perfect sense because in the 50s and 60s, that's where I'm spending the majority of my hockey budget and a pretty good portion of my overall collecting budget. So I expect those percentages to continue to change pretty drastically especially considering the number of graded cards I have. That's pretty significant movement within my hockey collection. And that's exactly where I want to be, because I want to add more 50s and 60s hockey, because I just love those cards and it is a focus area for me. There's just some odds and ends that I wanted to share. So the baseball set that I have the most graded cards from is 1962 Topps, where I have 41 cards. For football, it's 1975 Topps, where I also have 41 cards. And for hockey, it's the 81 Topps O-Pee-Chee, where I have 23 cards. And those are three sets that I very much like, so that is reflective of my interest in those particular years. So I'm glad to see that I have a lot of cards from those sets, because again, those are three of my favorites that I have. 61 Topps baseball is also very close to that, as well as 79 Topps football, which is another set that I very much enjoy collecting. And then for hockey, I have quite a few 68 Topps hockey, which is one of my favorite sets from that era as well. So my collection's pretty reflective of what I enjoy, but there is not a lot of variance between year to year within the sets I collect, from the mid 50s, let's say, into the late 80s, especially for baseball and football. I average probably around, in baseball, anywhere from 30 to 41 cards. As you can see here, that'd be the range for my baseball collection from 1956 to 1989. And then from football, it's going to be anywhere from 18 cards all the way up to 41, as you can see here with a 75 Topps set. But I have been slowly building over time, adding more football cards into my collection, because I have 30 and 36 card display cases. So I want to have at least 30 football cards from each year, from 1950 to probably 1989. I might not go that late, but certainly through the early 1980s, because I like to display cards from one set often within my cases. And then from hockey, I tend to put two 18 card groupings from sets within a 36 card case. So I'm not sure I'm ever going to get to 30 with hockey. That's probably not going to happen, but I just want to get a good representation of each of those years within my collection. This is an interesting slide. This is where the value in my collection is broken down by each of the sports that I collect. It's per VCP recent sales at the time I ran the data. So for April of 2021, baseball was 56% of the value of my collection. Football was 31%, and hockey was 13%. Now what's very interesting is, as of this month, I ran the data again, and the percentages have not changed. Even though I've bought many more cards since then, it's still 56%, 31% for football, and 13% for hockey. And that makes sense in some ways, because baseball certainly has more value than the other two sports have. But it's just funny, though, being that I bought that many more cards over that time, and more were football and hockey cards, that the percentages did not change. Just wanted to look at that, because that's also a good way just to measure the diversity within the collection as far as value goes. At the end of the day, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the total count, the value, the condition, and the quantity of legends you have in your possession. And sure, that's part of the fun. There's a certain thrill in flipping through a box and knowing you've got a gem tucked away in there. But the heart of a collection, it isn't about the quantity or even quality. It's about the cards themselves and what they represent. I find real peace in sorting through my cards, laying them out, reshuffling them, creating little visual stories in the way I display them. It's a kind of meditation, a quiet space where the noise of the world fades and all that matters is the cardboard, the ink, and memory. What makes this collection mine isn't just who's in it. It's how they all sit together. Lefty Grove can live right next to Vitamin Smith, and they both have a special place beside Chris Chelios. Different sports, different decades, different stories, but each one holds a spark of something bigger. They represent not just my love of sports, but my love of the history behind them, the nostalgia they stir up, and the way they make the past feel present again. So yes, it's fun to count the cards, to marvel at the eras, and the players and the stats. But the real joy, it's in the quiet moments, flipping through a stack, remembering a game, a story, a feeling. That's the true joy of the cards, and it's why I keep coming back to them. I hope everybody has a great Easter weekend. Until we talk again, take care.